I think that is one of the most important ideas in trying to improve yourself. If you don't understand what I call frame of reference, which sounds
100%. I mean, framing is literally everything.
Is literally everything. Getting people to understand that. So I just, in my NFT journey, I've created this thing called the life map for people. And as I sat there and I'm asking myself, like, what is the most fundamental thing that if people don't understand this, they're never going to be able to make progress? It was frame of reference. And getting people, did you hear David Foster Wallace's This Is Water?
No.
Oh
What is
my
it?
God, you're going to love it the most.
Say it.
All right, so, well, it's a whole, it's
Okay.
like
All right,
7 minutes long or something.
Okay.
But the idea is that the fish is the last one to realize that it's in water. And so he starts with this joke where, an old fish swims by these two young fish and says, hey boys, how's the water? And he swims past and they look at each other and go, what's water? And that to me is frame of reference. People don't even realize that they have a frame of reference, let alone that it was a choice, as you said, to choose the lens that you have.
Yep.
And even if they understand that they have a frame of reference and that they choose it, they don't realize how distorted their frame of reference is. And so getting people to understand, okay, everything you think, feel, your dreams, your nightmares, they are all a reflection of your frame of reference.
Yep.
And your frame of reference has been created over a lifetime, often in invisible moments, in moments of trauma. You're making a decision about what is true about the world, but because you mistake it for objective truth, you don't realize that, oh, I actually decided that the world works this way just now, in this moment, right here, based on this trauma. And you just get all these layers of distortion. And because people aren't aware that they're living inside of that frame of reference, like, even just to get to the point where people are like, oh, I see what you're saying. Like, it really takes a lot.
Yeah. It reminds me of two different psychologists. One is obviously Adam Grant more recently with his book, Think Again. I think he's spent a lot of time helping you see that your current self just has one frame of reference. Even yourself 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago may have had a slightly different nuanced frame of reference. And so he calls it the joy of being wrong. And that again is, I think, one of the appreciations I have about future self is just my current self has just one frame of reference. In a week from now, I'm going to have a totally different frame of reference. But have you ever heard of Robert Keegan?
From you.
Okay.
But otherwise, no.
Okay, so yeah, Keegan was a Harvard psychologist back in the day. He studied like organizational structures, and he had a different model. It was similar to Covey's like dependent, independent, interdependent model, but it was a lot more psychological, where he talked about how he called it, I think, a socializing self that a lot of people go through, high school kids, where their whole actions and behaviors are motivated by pleasing others or fitting in or something like that. Then you reach this authoring stage, which is a lot more competitive, where everything you see is just to further your own aims and your own agendas, but you can't see outside your frame of reference. And so from Keegan's belief and perspective, only 8% of people reach this level that you're talking about, where they can actually, he calls it the transforming self, where they start collaborating with people and they can see that they have a frame, that other people have frames, and that you can consciously step out of your frame and look at different frames of the same situation, and you recognize that your frame is just one frame. It's one way of seeing things. It's very limited, it's very inaccurate, but that doesn't limit you. Then you can try different frames. You can learn different things. You're always seeking to reframe and get new perspective, new angles on the same situation. Kind of reminds me of like a tennis player who goes into a lesson actually wanting to learn. It's like that beginner's mind where you can learn something from every situation rather than just, I know what I'm doing. But from Keegan's perspective, only about 8% of people get to this place, and organizations, where this is just one frame. My future self will see things different. There's a lot of different angles on this. But I think that that's a skill you could practice.
No doubt. How?
For me, one is just recognizing that my current self sees things different, again, than my past self 10 minutes ago, and just regularly being open. I think this is, again, another reason why to journal, is just, how do I see things? I can't ever see from your frame. I could ask you, though, and I could ask you how you see things, and I could be more curious rather than competitive. Like, rather than me trying to prove that my perspective's right, actually ask you what you think about it. Be more of a curious learner and actually have a more flexible frame. For me, I really like referencing back to my past self regularly and just asking myself and actually analyzing like why things turned out the way they did. Like, not being judgmental towards my former self, not being mad if I get angry at one of my kids, like rather than being upset about the past, just actually what was the frame that led me to coming to that conclusion, and how do I see things differently? It allows you to actually squeeze more juice out of things you learn. If I read a book, I can actually analyze how did my frame of reference change, or can I see things differently because I now have this information? And I think that this is an aspect of learning, is if you actually learn something that is a little outside your current frame of reference, are you willing to be honest with that new learning and start to apply it, or are you going to reject it and stick with your current, your former way of learning? So I think learning new frames, but then being honest with the new information you get and letting go of old ways is a big aspect of learning.
Did you see the movie The Sixth Sense?
Yeah, but I have not seen it for probably 20 years, like 15 years.
Do you remember the ending, I'm assuming?
Maybe. Tell us.
Oh my God.
Seriously,
okay,
dude, it's
great.
been that long. Dude, it's been that long.
All right, well, this is fun. This is the perfect example to me of what frame of reference is. So, spoiler alert for anybody that hasn't seen it, but the whole movie is you're watching it unfold and everything seems normal and you're not thinking anything of it, but this guy keeps having these weird run-ins with like his wife, and it just doesn't go the way you're thinking it will go. And then you finally get to the end of the film and you realize that the main character that you've been following this whole time is dead.
Yeah, I remember.
And he's a ghost. And then they play back little snippets of the movie so that you realize no one ever actually had an exchange with him. You feel like they kind of do, but when you play it, I have the chills right now. And that's frame of reference, where you suddenly see the exact same moments. But when you thought he was alive, you read the interactions one way. When you realize he's a ghost and wasn't actually there, and so they were just having a lonely moment where they went to their favorite restaurant on their anniversary to mourn, but because you see it as he's sitting there with them, you read the exchange as this really cold exchange where she's basically ignoring him and sort of dumping him. And that's frame of reference. And it can be that profoundly like jarring where you're like, whoa, there is this entirely other oblique angle with which I can look at my life for good, bad, indifferent, whatever. But suddenly like these vistas of possibilities open up before you. For instance, to bring this back to letting go of what other people think, I think so many people construct their life around, okay, what are they going to think? One, you have to be honest, like you've said multiple times, this is so important. You have to be honest with yourself that you want their approval, seek their approval, or have historically sought their approval, whatever, so that you can now begin to look at the world. What would this look like if I actually didn't care what they thought? And how differently would I move and would I act? I think people would often be startled to see the answers if they were journaling honestly, what their life would look like if they didn't worry about their significant other's thoughts, the social media people's thoughts, their parents' thoughts, like that their life would look dramatically different.
Yeah, so many things come to mind, and now I do remember that movie. One thing that I love about that is that once you get the new frame, right, it changes everything. In the past, you look back at all the old perspectives now with the new frame. And that's really how memory works. They call memory a reconstruction. And so like you never actually see the past as it is, but only as your current self perceives it, right? So there's a really great quote from Brent's life. He wrote a book called Time and Psychological Explanation. You would actually really love it. But basically he said that it's more accurate to say that the present causes the meaning of the past than the past causes the meaning of the present. Because
Facts.
Yeah, because the present causes the meaning of the past because it's the present frame. And so whenever you pull up a memory, it's from the frame of your current self. And so you get that new information, like at the end of the movie, boom, it changes the meaning of everything that occurred in the past. And so that's one nice part is as you get new information, new perspectives, you actually automatically reframe the whole past from the present. And so any view you have of the past is actually just a reflection of where you're currently at, which is really interesting.
The most powerful resource you have is not your time. It's not money. It's not even your skills. It's literally your attention. It's where you place your attention, and it's your ability to control where your attention lies. In the world that we live in, there are so many options, paths, excitements, distractions that often we do not control our attention, but our attention is seized upon by so many other things. It could be distractions. It could be things you think you need. It could be relationships. It could be investments. It could be things like cryptocurrency. It could be anything. Wherever your attention is constantly being drawn, that is ultimately not something you truly care for, you are being sapped and you are being sucked. And ultimately what is happening is you're not able to be present with where you want to be. The goal is to be really clear on where you want your time and attention. The goal is that your attention is literally fully immersed in exactly where you want to be, in who you want to be with, and what you want to be doing. If you cannot control your attention from all of the endless buzz and noise and distractions out there, then you cannot be present with your loved ones. You cannot actually live your life, and you cannot engage in what Cal Newport would call deep work, or what Dan Sullivan would call unique ability. And so you've got to actually get really, really clear on what is the game you're actually playing, because there are endless games going on out there. And 99% of them are irrelevant to you. 99% of what's going on out in the world, even people's paths to success, won't work for you if it's not what you ultimately want. Because unless you're 100% committed to something, if you're only 98% committed to something, as Clayton Christensen would say, the Harvard professor, 98% commitment is much harder than 100%, because if you're 98% committed, then you're still distracted by other things. You haven't fully committed. You haven't made the decision. You haven't blocked out the noise. And if you're just partially dabbling in a lot of things, if you're so split focused, then as the Bible states, literally, a double-minded man or person is unstable in all their ways. Perfection is not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. And it takes hard decisions to remove things from your life that are pulling away your attention from what matters most. And so you've got to be really honest with yourself. What are the things that are taking away your attention, which you've either placed so much value on or which you've placed dependence on, that you think you need this thing even though you don't really want it, and it's literally sucking you away from being the person you want to be? So you got to get clear on what's the game that you're playing. I love the new book, The Psychology of Money. In that book, the author talks about how you really got to know the game you're playing. And this is, he's talking in specifics about investing money. Unless you know the game you're playing, you're going to get sucked into other people's games, and other people have different rules and different benchmarks for their game. As an example, let's just say you're someone who has a really long path, and you've got like 20, 30 years of investing, and you're really looking for conservative investments that make long-term compound growth, and that you're really trying to protect your family, as one example, so that you can focus on your family, have freedom of mind, freedom of attention. In fact, that's actually one of the things that the author talks about, is that the true measure of wealth is not actually the amount of money you have, but it's the ability and autonomy to have options and to have freedom of mind and peace of mind, and to have your mind placed on what you want rather than riding the emotional ups and downs. If you're someone who's playing a really long-term game, but you're listening to the advice of people who are like day traders playing short-term games, and you're following their advice and trying to actually play their games, you're not going to win, because you're not playing their game. They're masters of that game. You're dabbling in that game. And if you're dabbling in anything, you're going to get crushed. You're going to get beat. The only game that you can win is the game that you ultimately want to play, which is how you define success. What matters to you is different from what matters to me. The path that will work for you is different from the path that will work for me. And so you've got to get really clear on what is the game you're playing. And then you got to be okay ignoring all of the FOMO and the noise of people presenting other games that are honestly just irrelevant to your goal, to your game. I love the quote from, I believe it's John C. Maxwell. He said, you cannot underestimate the unimportance of practically everything. 99% of everything out there is non-essential towards your future self. So the first thing you got to do is clarify your future self. The more clear you get on your future self, the easier it is to live powerfully in the present. In fact, research by Dr. Hal Hershfield at UCLA has directly found a correlation between the connection you have with your own future self and your ability to make informed, intentional, quality decisions in the present. You can't actually make clear decisions in the present without knowing the game you're playing, without knowing the goal that you have, the ultimate aim. Aristotle actually had a term for this. He called this final cause. He said that the final cause, or the ultimate aim in which you have, is the driver or the cause of literally everything you're doing. But if you're not clear on what you ultimately want, if you're not clear on what you value, and if you ultimately allow all sorts of things to derail and to pull you from what you ultimately want, then you're playing other people's games. You've got FOMO. You're placing your confidence on something or someone else rather than confidence on yourself. You're FOMOing, you're worrying about what other people are doing rather than just owning that this is the game I want to play. I actually really like the work from Ryan Holiday, the author of many of the books on Stoicism. And he talked about how throughout his career, he had to make various trade-offs. He had to decide, do I really want to grow a big business or do I want to optimize for books? And he decided that the game he really ultimately wanted to play was books. And he's written many, many great books. And all the time, he says no to flashy opportunities that are pulling him from the game that he's decided he would play. And so you really have to decide what's the game you want to play, and who cares what other people think about that? Who cares what other people think about your game? It's your game, it's your life. And the path that works for you, it doesn't really matter if that's not the path that other people think you should go. For example, I have a friend who lives in California. I live in Florida. And he and I were talking about just basically the situation in California, political situation, COVID situation. And for him, living in California still makes a lot of sense for him and his family. It's a great path for him right now, even if it may not make sense to some other people who are moving out of California. That's his game. And he's clear on his game, and he's clear on his goals, and he's clear on his means. One of the reasons why we get sucked into problems or having our attention sucked into things that we don't ultimately want is because we've lost track of our ends, and we've now gotten caught in unhealthy means. You may get desperate for certain means because you think that that means is an effective way to getting to your ends, but actually that means is actually pulling you away from being present and living powerfully as the life you want to live. I've actually gotten caught up in this many times myself. Rather than being fully present and immersed with my wife and kids, or rather than being able to just sit and think and write, which is my profession, I've gotten caught up in all of the noise in certain aspects because I think that those things may be helpful toward my goals, but ultimately they're literally pulling me away. And so you've got to be clear, is this actually pulling you away from what you ultimately want? Even if you thought for a moment that it was going to be helpful. This is why you've got to be clear on means goals and ends goals. It's also really helpful using the Aristotle framework, final cause, that you want to know what is the end game, and realizing and appreciating that you can actually pretty much have that right now. My friend Richie Norton actually recently wrote a book called Anti-Time Management, and it's all about getting rid of traditional time management and focusing on your attention. When you can control your attention, you can control your life. And so the key is literally removing anything and everything that stops you from owning your attention and owning your focus on what matters most to you. In order to do this, you've got to have confidence in yourself, not confidence in externals. You've got to know the game you're playing and be completely comfortable letting go of all other games. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Don't worry about other games. You're playing your game. This is your life, and your attention is what matters most. And being super present with your loved ones, being present with your best work, doing deep work, being able to be in flow, having peace of mind, being able to sleep at night without being so caught up. One thing that this might require is it might require you to own up to some of your bad decisions where your attention has been absorbed in certain things, or maybe where you've FOMO'd into certain things. You might have to face the repercussions and consequences of your behavior. This is where I really like the work of Tim Grover. He wrote the book Relentless, and he talks about a concept called cleaners. Cleaners are people who ultimately get the results that they want. And a cleaner, according to Tim Grover, is someone who fully admits when they make mistakes. This also fits with Dr. Carol Dweck's work on fixed mindset versus growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset don't like admitting that they've made mistakes. They have a very fragile identity. Whereas if you have a growth mindset, you're willing to fully own that you've made a mistake. All progress starts by telling the truth. And it's much better to be 100% committed to the game you want to play, because if you can get 100% committed to your game, to your life, to your attention, and if you can block everything out, literally remove anything that's sucking your attention away from what you want, then you can go all in on yourself, on your unique skill set, on your unique goals, on your unique relationships, on your final cause. As Aristotle would say, you can live your life with intention. You can focus on what you prioritize, on what you value, on what's essential to you. And that's probably the biggest challenge that we face in today's world, is that because we're not clear on what we value, we're not clear on our final cause, the game we're playing, we're not clear on what we truly want, and we don't prize our attention. We're willing to give our attention to the most wasteful, distractive things, and then ultimately we let our attention get hooked to things, and we start worrying about what other people are doing and playing other people's games. Then we become so split focused, double-minded, that we can never actually truly be present. We live regretful lives and we make regretful decisions rather than just owning our life owning our long-term game, owning what we ultimately want, and doing and placing our confidence in ourselves, placing our confidence in ourselves and our own future, and that we can create the game we want, and then doing our best work. It's very difficult for people to do deep work these days. Cal Newport actually said that attention or focus is the IQ of the 21st century, because so few people can focus. So few people can control their attention. So few people are willing to eliminate anything that distracts them from who they really want to be, who they want to be with, and the work that they really want to do in its deepest form. If you want to be successful, you've got to go really deep. You got to experience extreme flow on a regular basis and be in a flow state. You got to be in the zone, and you can get into the zone regularly if you're willing to eliminate everything that's stopping you from being in the zone. Again, perfection is not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. And when you commit to a much bigger future, it'll become very obvious to you. It'll become very clear all of the areas of your life that are out of alignment, all of the areas where you're giving attention to something that's ultimately a distraction. And then the invitation is on you. Will you remove this distraction? Will you eliminate this, even if it comes with temporary costs? I love the quote from Dr. Daniel Kahneman. He said, "I have no sunk costs. Just because I was partially invested in something in the past doesn't mean I'm not willing to eliminate it right now." Just because you may have invested in something or placed a lot of time, energy, and attention on something, if you have no sunk cost bias, then what that means is you'll eliminate anything and everything. I love the quote from Brian Tracy. He actually has a concept called zero-based thinking. He said, "Knowing what I know now, what would I not get myself into? Or what relationships would I never do knowing what I know now?" Just because you're involved in certain situations or business deals or relationships or opportunities or behaviors, just because you're involved in those things doesn't mean you can't eliminate them right now. If you've got no sunk costs, then you're willing to remove all things that don't align with your vision, and you're willing to eliminate those things. Whereas if you're someone who allows sunk cost to guide your decision, then just because you invested in something in the past, that kind of forces you to stay hyper committed to it. And that means you'll probably keep investing more and more into it, even if you already know you're throwing good money after bad. And so it's so much better to just accept the sunk costs, accept that you made this decision, and then to not worry about it and just to eliminate it and just to say, this is what I'm going for. Just because my past self made those decisions doesn't mean my current self has to. That's what zero-based thinking is all about, is knowing what I know now, I'm much more informed than my former self. It's not worth my time and attention. Your time and attention are so valuable. And if you realize that you can develop brilliant skills, if you realize that you can literally create your future, then you realize that by being split focused and by giving your attention to even a perceived brilliant, shiny object that is an amazing opportunity or blah, 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 you realize that by giving your attention to that, you're giving up so much. You're giving up so much potential. If you realize that you are the actual asset and that you have the ability to develop brilliant skills and to be present with your loved ones. It's that idea that people have so many regrets because, their kids grow up and they realize that they were so focused on the wrong things and they lost what mattered most to them. They didn't have their time and attention on what mattered. They also didn't value their own self, their own game. They placed their confidence in someone else or in something else rather than their confidence in themselves. So your attention is really what you want to optimize for. Placing your attention on what you want, playing the game you want to play. Don't worry about other people. Don't worry about other games. Remove everything from your life that's pulling your attention away from what you want, regardless of the short-term costs. The long-term gains will be infinitely more because you build confidence. How you do anything is how you do everything. And if you stop justifying having your attention sucked on things you don't care about, if you start being far more powerful, far more present in where you want, if you start doing your best deep work in your most unique abilities, and if you just own your game, then you're going to make massive compound interest on what matters to you, and you'll be living intuitively, intentionally, presently. You'll sleep good at night. Your mind won't be sucked in different places. You won't make FOMO regrets. Instead, you'll experience the consistent compound effect that really is how people live empowering, powerful lives. Other people's games are not your games. If they're 100% committed to their game, they're going to beat you if you're only dabbling in it because you're split focused. In the book, The Road Less Stupid, the author Keith Cunningham talks about the importance of having thinking time. Literally giving yourself time to just think, just reflect, just meditate. How often do you do that? How often do you give yourself literally 2 to 3 hours where you have no inputs coming in? You just can think. You can actually meditate. There's a lot of research, obviously, on the idea of journaling in the morning, waking up and journaling for 10, 15 minutes. That's a really beautiful space to think. And usually first thing in the morning, especially if you don't put any inputs in, if you don't open your phone, look at social media, look at your email, because the more things you put in your head, the faster you turn your brain on, and then you're sending your brain in multiple directions. So obviously there's a lot of research on wake up first thing in the morning, without input, just go ahead and get yourself into the right environment, get yourself hydrated, and then journal for 10 to 15 minutes. That's powerful micro thinking time. And you can get a lot of creative bursts. You can get a lot of what Josh Waitzkin would call subconscious breakthroughs. Your subconscious is always working even when you're asleep. And so in the morning, when you give yourself that thinking time, you can get extreme clarity. You could even get inspiration, because it's a very meditative time in the morning. And especially if you're in a flow state and your brain's not going 1,000 different directions, but you're just keeping your brain in that slow alpha state, you're writing. But how often do you give yourself a 2 to 3 hour session of just meditative thinking time? Recently, and I'll link down below, but there was this soft binaural beats, slow piano music that I had playing recently. And I just let it play deep in my environment. I laid on the couch right behind me. I was staring out that window. I had my journal next to me on the table right there. And I just laid there for literally 3 hours, listening to the beats and just letting myself think and process everything going on in my life. And every time a thought would come that was useful, I'd write it down in my journal. And I did this for 3 hours. And I was shocked at how many insights, how many things came together, because I actually gave myself that thinking time. It was a form of deep meditation. And here's what's crazy. So I've got this watch, it's a Garmin watch, and on it, it tells me what my body battery is. My body battery is essentially my energy. And when my heart rate really lowers and goes down and I'm in more of a deep meditative state, my body battery goes up because I'm actually recovering. I'm in a deep state of meditative recovery. And while I lay there for those 3 hours, I went from, so it's on a scale from 0 to 100, but I went from 50 to 90 on my body battery over these 3 hours of just deep meditating, and my heart rate dropped lower than it's ever dropped in a very healthy way. And I'm telling you, my ideas, my insights, what's amazing was when you give yourself time to think and meditate without interruptions, my phone was on airplane mode, I was able to really work out a lot of the things in my life. And I look back on a lot of the things I've been able to accomplish. There's been certain days where I just actually took the morning off from work and I just gave myself the space to think. And journal, journaling is obviously so powerful, but giving yourself the space to think, journal, write, and you've got a few hours just of freedom to really just relax, recover. So think about it. There's an idea that a lot of good ideas happen when you're in the shower. Why is that? When you're in the shower, you're usually relaxed. There's a lot of research that shows that only 16% of ideas come to you when you're hard at work and focused and cranking. Usually, the best ideas happen when you're fully relaxed, fully recovered, you're not stressed out. That's why people go on vacation and stuff like that, or take sabbaticals, and they end up getting all sorts of amazing insights and clarity and creativity, and they feel a lot better about their lives. They're able to make decisions. They're better able to resolve concerns. And so my question for you and my challenge for you is, are you willing to put that block in your schedule? Chances are, if you're like any other normal person, you have to waste at least 1 to 4 hours a day. That could be on social media. It could be just scrolling. It could just be at the end of the day, you're exhausted and you're doing nothing. Chances are there's 3 or 4 hours every day in your life that is kind of burned, just because of exhaustion or because of your distractions or bad habits. Now, I'm not asking you to give yourself 3 hours every single day for that deep meditation. That would probably be too much. Chances are you can squeeze something like that in once a week or every other week or even once a month. And I can promise you that if you gave yourself about 2 to 3 hours once a week or once a month to just think and meditate and be in flow, you could even do it at the end of the day. Chances are the last 3 hours of your day, there's some downtime. Most people, they're consuming because your willpower is often fried at the end of the day, and you don't give yourself the ability to recover. Instead, you just consume junk food, junk media. You're kind of just plugged in and you're not really there. But if instead you turned on meditative music, soft, quiet music, and literally just allowed yourself to recover, you might even fall asleep, and you definitely sleep better. Obviously, there's a lot of research that shows you shouldn't be staring at screens shortly before bed anyways. And so by slowing everything down, you're going to get yourself into a much better space of sleep. But I would also invite you to make time and invest in yourself and schedule that somewhere in the middle of your week. at some point, if you can, in the next month. Take half your day off, and rather than needing to go and doing more and more and more, actually it's by doing less. Give yourself the space, give yourself the time to recover, reflect, rest. And you're gonna be shocked at how many insights you're gonna get. You're gonna be able to solve your problems just by sitting there and thinking, reflecting, and also savoring. There's a lot of research on the subject of savoring, mindfulness, and gratitude. Savoring is the idea of just literally enjoying the moment. Often people have lost the ability to savor because they're so busy thinking about the next thing, or they're so distracted. You can't savor that food you're eating because you're also looking at your phone, so you're not actually in flow. Mindfulness, similar to savoring, is actually being aware of what's going on inside your head, inside your body, inside your life, and also what's on around you. And so by taking the time to meditate and go deep, sometimes you just need a deep meditative session where it's just, you just got nothing for a few hours, and you can actually just think things through. Journal for a while, journal what you're dealing with, journaling what you're thinking about, and then just lay. And you can kind of go back and forth. And it doesn't have to be lay, you can sit or you can be standing or whatever, but giving yourself time to just think, rest, reflect, be grateful, and then going back and forth in your journal and coming to some conclusions about things you want to do. I can promise you you'll get insights. Just as a quick thought, one of the things that I've been really trying to do in my own life is being a lot more connected with my wife and my kids. And so earlier this week when I had this 3-hour meditation session, I got so many amazing ideas and insights about how I can improve my relationship with my wife. And I wrote them all down, I acted on them immediately. And it's amazing how quick you can make needed adjustments in your life if you gave yourself the space to ultimately get clear. And meditation obviously is found to improve your life. It improves your optimism. Optimistic people live at least, on average 10 years longer than pessimistic people. There's actually findings on that in positive psychology. That's that's the key. That's my recommendation for you. Obviously you want the micro thinking time sessions first thing in the morning. It's also nice at the end of the day to have a micro session where you maybe just take 5-10 minutes to reflect on your day, on what you learned, on what you won, on what you need to do the next day. But give yourself a 2 to 3 hour block sometime once a month or once a week to just think, just reflect, just think on what you're trying to accomplish, just think about who's in your life, just think about what you need to change. Give yourself that time to meditate, reflect, think, savor, be grateful, be mindful, get clear, and then all of a sudden you can start making better and better decisions, because I can promise you there are a lot of things in your life right now that you don't want. There's a lot of things in your life right now that you want to improve and change. And it's by getting clear and giving yourself that space and respecting yourself enough that you can ultimately get clear on what needs to get removed. And then ultimately your life becomes an upward spiral where you can ultimately remove the things that you don't want in your life, the things that don't resonate with your future self. And you can start making powerful decisions here and now that will help you become your future self. One of the things that happened this week for me as well is I was able to end a relationship, end a collaborative business relationship with someone I didn't want to be in anymore. And I believe a big part of that is because I stopped resonating with that person. I was meditating, I was reflecting. It just became clear to me that that relationship didn't make sense anymore. And so we were able to end it very amiably, very kindly. But when you give yourself that space, when you get yourself clear, when you give yourself time to think and get clear and ultimately to make decisions about what you need to do, then you can actually move yourself forward. So Abraham Lincoln said, if you gave him 6 hours to chop down a tree, he would spend the first 5 sharpening the axe. Or as Stephen Covey would say, sharpen the saw. If you're just running on fumes, I can promise you your thinking process is not very good. If you're not taking time to recover, meditate, reflect, journal, get clear. This is the most high frequency, high form of recovery, is deep meditation, deep flow. You're going to get yourself into such an extreme flow state and peace state. You're going to feel grateful. You're going to be mindful. You're going to savor the moment. You're going to be clear on what's important to you. You're going to get clear on what needs to change. And you're just giving yourself that time to just elevate yourself. And then ultimately you can make decisions from that new frame of mind, that new state of being, and you can remove the things in your life that are ultimately keeping you stuck. A lot of people are on the hamster wheel, and also think about it this way. A lot of people, they're really trying to get to retirement so that eventually they can sit on the beach and actually have meditation, have rest, have recovery. When I was laying on my couch staring out the window and just in a deep state of meditation, I was thinking to myself, there are so many people I know that are just go, 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 go. And ultimately, they're not happy. They're just chasing happiness. They're pursuing happiness. I love the quote that there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. If you're not taking the time to actually get yourself clear, be healed, then it doesn't really matter how much you're going to go. There's a great quote from Stephen Covey. He says, every step you're taking up the ladder, if it's leaning against the wrong wall, is ultimately taking you further and further from your goal. And so if you're not giving yourself time to think, meditate, and get clear, then it does not matter how many steps you're taking and how fast you're furiously going, you're ultimately going the wrong direction. I love the quote from Ryan Holiday. He said that people, and this isn't an exact quote, but he said people are just so impulsively moving forward, but they don't actually know what they want. They don't even know where they're going. And so I know a lot of people that way, a lot of very ambitious, a lot of high achieving people who are working so hard and they're spinning their wheels so fast, but ultimately they're chasing success, they're chasing happiness, and they're chasing something that's a mirage that they're never going to actually get. And they're never giving themselves the time to actually connect with themselves and to think, is this what I really want? Or on the other end, there's those people who are working really hard for that one day when they can finally meditate and retire and, rest and recover. It's like, if you actually include that in your life, and if you study the lives of any high performer, they actually put meditation, they put recovery and being connected with themselves and flow before anything else, so that then they can actually do their best work. They can work on the right things. They can remove the wrong things. They can be connected with themselves, and they can just be in a pure peace state. So please take advantage of the micro thinking times in the morning so that every day you're actually focused on the right priorities, but give yourself some time for a macro, more deep level meditative thinking time at least once a week or once a month. And you can also use that to some degree as a planning session. First off, taking the time to reflect on all the great things that have happened, reflecting on your progress that you've made. A lot of research that shows by reflecting on your progress, you'll feel movement. That'll give you motivation and momentum and confidence by actually reflecting on the progress you've made, but also then you can make plans. So if you took this time once a week or once a month, then you could make better and better plans, and you'd be clear on the right things and you could take the right actions. If you're not taking this time, I can promise you you're missing out on insights and ideas that would ultimately benefit your life. Ideas that your subconscious will give you because you're in that higher meditative state and you're resting and recovering. That's, again, good ideas. Only 16% of them are going to come when you're busy or working. Almost all of them are going to happen more that shower meditative state. And if you're giving yourself a 3-hour just deep meditation, the amount of ideas and insights your subconscious is going to give you is unbelievable, which can improve your life, improve your relationships. You'll get the idea, reach out to that person. Say, send them flowers or reach out to that possible mentor, reach out to your wife, whatever it is. All of those possible experiences you'll not get because you were too busy focused on spinning your wheels. And missing those is the difference between go in one direction in your life and go in another. So in this video, I'm gonna talk about why you should try to be accomplishing way less on a daily basis. So many people have like 10 items on their to-do list every single day, and that ultimately ends up being to their detriment. Let me give a very simple, practical example. Right now, I am actually training to run a 100-mile ultramarathon. I'm just getting back into shape of running. And so today, I went to the treadmill at the gym, and I did an amazing workout. I pushed myself hard on that treadmill. I ran for like 25 minutes at a very fast speed and was done. I then stretched, recovered. I used my massage gun. It was amazing. And that was this morning. And it was awesome. I walked away. But then afternoon came and I was like, maybe I should squeeze in another run. And I thought to myself, no, if I'm trying to squeeze in too much in 24 hours, then that's going to ultimately potentially lead to injury. It's going to stop me from recovering. If I just recover and then go back and have a better, more focused, more deliberate workout tomorrow, then tomorrow's workout's gonna be better than if I worked out again today and then went to the gym. And so the point is that you wanna actually have focused, deliberate practice. In psychology, it's called deliberate practice. This is how you become an expert at anything, is you've gotta actually have targeted, specific goals, and your training takes you way outside your comfort zone, it pushes you, but then you have to actively recover. You've gotta actively recover. And if you don't do this, then you're gonna be spread too thin. There's two types of economies, as Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach, says. There's a results economy and there's a time and effort economy. The time and effort economy are people who pride themselves on how much time it takes or how busy they are or how hard they're working.
Whereas the results economy just is focused on getting the result in the most effective way possible. One of the best concepts I've ever heard is from Tim Ferriss. He calls it the minimum effective dose. The idea is that there's always a dosage in order to produce the result. For example, to boil water, the dose is 212 degrees. Anything above 212 degrees is wasteful. Once you hit 212 degrees, the water boils. You don't need anything more than that. But a lot of people, they'll like go up to 250 degrees. They'll do all these different things to produce a result when it's like, no, what is the minimum effective dose? What is the most simple, most effective thing to produce a desired result? You need to get results oriented because that allows you to apply the 80-20 rule, which is what are the few things you're doing that ultimately produce the biggest result? And so here's another reason why you want to actually focus on less on a daily basis, but ultimately more high quality results. If you're trying to do 5 to 10 different things in a day, ultimately you're focused on quantity, not quality. And if you're focused on quantity over quality, then you're doing a lot of things, but you're ultimately doing it with a low level of standard. If you're focused on quality, on the other hand, then you do a few things, very focused, very precision, very smart, that ultimately allows you to make rapid progress. You do it deliberately. You're going out of your comfort zone. It's like doing a workout. You know, if you work out for 15, 20 minutes, but it was an insane workout, then if you actively recover, while you're recovering, your subconscious is processing how good that workout was. That then becomes your new baseline. You're training yourself to have new baselines. I remember when I was writing blog posts back in the day. For a long time, I was the #1 writer in the world on medium.com. And I remember learning and training myself to get into a deep flow state, write an amazing article and push publish. And I knew the articles would go viral before I even hit publish because of how it felt while I was writing it. I was just like, there's no way this isn't going to go viral. And they often did. And I trained myself to feel at that level. High performance just became a norm because when you step away and you allow yourself to psychologically detach, psychological detachment is such a key concept. What it means is that you want to totally recover from work. You want to hit it hard and then fully turn off. And while you're fully turned off, whether you're just playing with your kids, doing some other activity, watching a movie, and this could be with anything. It could be with work, with working out, whatever it is. You want to be fully recovering, but while you're recovering, while you're away, your subconscious is actually processing the very last thing you did. So Josh Waitzkin, the guy who wrote The Art of Learning, and this is one of the best books on high performance, he talks about how he interviewed a guy named Billy Kidd once. Billy Kidd was an Olympic skier. And Billy Kidd explained to Josh what the 3 most important turns are on a ski run. A lot of people think it might be the first 3, like when you get off the chairlift and your first 3 turns set the tone for the full run. That's not true. It's actually the last 3 turns, because most people, their last 3 turns are kind of sloppy as they're getting ready to get onto the chairlift and go back up for the next run. The last 3 turns ultimately set the tone, because once you get onto the chairlift, you're now going up, and for the next 10 minutes, your subconscious is processing the last 3 things you did, and that sets the tone for your next run. And so whatever you do, it's setting the tone subconsciously for your baseline for how you do things. This is why you want to do things at a quality high level versus a quantity low level. You need to recover and psychologically detach so that during your next workout or during your next workday, you're primed to go deeper, harder, and better, so that you ultimately get better and better at that thing, pushing for better results rather than just being busy. So my invitation to you is, as Jim Collins would say, if you have more than 3 priorities, you've got none. Have no more than 3 things on your daily to-do list. Knock out the most important things at a quality level, and then turn yourself off and recover. Don't try to overly do too much. Again, as Bill Gates said, people overestimate what they can do in a short amount of time, and they underestimate how much they can do in a long amount of time. One of the reasons for that is because people, because they're so impulsive, and ultimately they don't have a long-term vision. If you have a long-term vision, you're fine doing things in a smart, intelligent way. You know, you're fine taking the long game. But if you're impulsive, if you don't have confidence, the more confidence you have, the longer version or the longer vision you will have. If you have a longer-term vision, you're willing to just take the right steps today, recover, and get back at it tomorrow and take the right steps. And ultimately, you know that the compound effect is going to speed you through. And you're making quality a way of life. And you're also going deep in your deliberate practice so that when you hit it, you're hitting it hard. You're going way out of your comfort zone every time you do it, but you're recovering so that you've got enough to give to it. But if you're impulsive, you're going to try to squeeze a bunch of things in today, but ultimately then set yourself up for failure tomorrow. And that's ultimately going to cause you to have less long-term success, because you're constantly going up and down. You're constantly going back and forth. You're having so many inconsistent days. Again, less but better. That's the essentialist way. Do less things. Focus on results, not process. Focus on the results, and ultimately then reverse engineer the right process. Minimum effective dose. What are the few things that if you do it correctly and wisely, it's going to create exponential results and take lots of time for active recovery? Do not try to do too much in a single day. Do the few right things, recover, let your subconscious ride. It's just like being on the chairlift. While you're recovering, your brain is reprocessing the last thing you did, and you're making high performance and flow your way of being. While you're recovering, actually, you're going to be in a way more flow state with your loved ones, with whatever form of recovery you're doing. You're going to be present. You're not going to be distracted. How you do anything is how you do everything. If you go super deep while you're working, you can go super off while you're recovering. You can fully recover. You'll sleep better. You'll have less anxiety. You won't be needing to be in a million different directions. That's called decision fatigue. That's called not knowing what you want. Just define the few things you want. Don't compare yourself to anyone else, and go deep on that, and then recover and set yourself up so that tomorrow you can go even further. Recover, tomorrow you can go even further, rather than being impulsive today and then ultimately giving up before you get anywhere.
So in this video, I'm going to talk about the one thing, the absolute one thing that has to be changed and addressed and focused upon if you want to make any specific change, whether it's small change or massive change. But I'm just telling you right now, having massive goals is actually easier than small goals, because first off, massive goals force more honesty. They highlight to you that almost everything you're doing right now is a distraction. Using the 80-20 principle, 80% of what you're doing is only producing 20% of your results. So if you have a massive goal, going 10 times bigger in a certain area, then it quickly highlights, it's like an honesty filter. It shows you very clearly, you start to see it, that almost everything you're doing is a waste, and it forces you to find those few pathways that would get you there, that 20% that yields most of the results. And then it's an invitation, if you're willing to fully commit, to go all in on that 20%, to go all in. And so this then takes me to that one thing. The one thing, the core bottleneck to any form of change that you want to make isn't your behavior, it's actually your identity. Your identity is the only change you can make in terms of long-term change, because your identity is who you are. If you do not change your identity, but are just trying to modify your behavior, that's essentially willpower, and your behavior is always going to revert back to your identity, because your behavior comes from your identity. And so the question is, how do you change your identity? Another question actually is just, what is identity? Again, the psychological definition of identity is that which you are most committed to as a person. It's how you see yourself, it's how you define yourself, but ultimately it's what you're most committed to in terms of your beliefs, your goals, your values. It is what you are most committed to. And as people, we not only act from our identity, but we also see the world through our identity. There's a great quote from Stephen Covey in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He said, "You don't see the world as it is. You see the world as you are. You don't see things objectively. None of us see the world objectively. We all have a subjective perspective." One of my psychology professors said, for example, if a guy says that a woman is beautiful, he's not actually describing the woman, he's describing himself, because he has a subjective perspective. None of us see anything objectively. So we see the world through our identity. We also act in the world through our identity. There's a great quote in the book, As a Man Thinketh, by James Allen, and he said that men do not attract that which they want, they attract that which they are. Who you are is reflecting in who you're being and how you're acting, and ultimately what you're getting. So we act based on our identity. How you do anything is how you do everything. And your identity is that which you're most committed to as a person. So everything you're doing, even watching this video, is because you're committed to watching this video, and you can know you're committed to watching this video because you're doing it. Everything you're doing is a reflection of what you're committed to, as all you have to do is observe your behavior. And there's a great quote in the book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, where they say that commitment is a statement of what is. You can know what you're committed to by your results, not by what you say you want your results to be, but by your results. We're all committed, we're all producing results. The result is a proof of a commitment. Again, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so if you want to change your life, you ultimately have to commit 100% to what you want. Another great quote from Robert Brault. He said, "We're kept from our goal, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to lesser goals." When you commit to a goal, or when you have a goal, it's not the obstacles that stops you, it's that you have so many clear paths to lesser goals. Clear paths to lesser goals means that you're still committed to those lesser goals. You're still entertaining those multiple options. You haven't made a decision, which means you cut off alternative options. Cutting off alternative options means you no longer entertain those lesser goals, you remove them. And once you get 100% committed to something, you start to see the world through it. And you start to change your world around you, because how you do anything is how you do everything. And once you get committed, And once you actually start to embody the identity of your desired future self, it becomes very obvious to you all of the areas in which your life is not up to the standard. Standard is another way of saying commitment. If something is a standard, but you keep going below it, then it's not really a standard. So your standard that you hold yourself to in any particular area is your identity. It's your commitment. And so the only way to actually achieve a goal is to make it a standard. And you make something a standard by actually like saying, this is what I am now. You know, it could be, for example, you raise your price to a certain level and then you start saying no to opportunities that are below that. That's the key right there. You have to have commitment, and then after commitment comes courage. Dan Sullivan, the co-founder of Strategic Coach, actually has a 4-step model. It's beautiful. He calls it the 4 C's formula. And he basically says all progress starts with commitment. Nothing happens until after you commit. And so commitment is when you actually like commit to something and you set a new standard, you clarify a standard. And as people, we all operate based on standards. Some people, though, their standards aren't very clear, and they say they're standards, but they're not really standards. This actually brings up another Dan Sullivan concept. He calls it always be the buyer. And the buyer is someone who's clear on what they want and they can walk away. They're happy to walk away because they're confident enough to walk away because their standards matter a lot. Whereas if someone's a seller, and this doesn't mean that buyers don't actually like sell products, it just means that they're clear on what they're doing and they're comfortable walking away from a situation if it doesn't meet their standard. Whereas the seller, if you have a seller mindset, then you're really trying to sell yourself. And you're desperate to be in the situation, desperate to be in the relationship. And so you're actually willing to, you know, basically lower your standard. You're not willing to walk away. And so it's key, if you want to have crucial, healthy, transformational relationships, for you to be the buyer where you're clear on your standards. You have relationships with other people who have clear standards. And together, although your standards may not individually be the same, the relationship values and supports all parties' standards. And the vision clearly takes all parties to where they want to go. That's called a transformational relationship, not a transactional relationship. If one person is the buyer and another person is the seller, it's going to be transactional because they're not going to be able to go through the transformation process because the seller is going to not really be clear on who they are. They're going to be really desperate. It creates muddledness. So you have to make something a standard if you want it to become your identity. And then if it's a standard, you're going to start saying no to everything that's not the standard. You're going to start removing the 80%. If you want to go for 10x growth, as an example, using the 80-20 rule, 80% of what you're doing right now is a distraction. 80% of what you're doing only produces 20% of your results. 80% of what you're doing are lesser goals. 80% of what you're doing is what got you here but won't get you there. It's ineffective. It's busyness. And so if you want to go 10x, you've got to first clarify what that 10x is, get committed to it, and then focus on the few areas where you yourself are going to get 10 times better. 10 times better precedes 10 times bigger. Internal change precedes external change in terms of permanent change, identity change. Yes, you can tweak the environment. Yes, you can put yourself around new mentors. Absolutely, that's essential. You have to also create the environment around you that supports this. But in the end, you have to transform your identity. And once you do that, you start reshaping, reconstructing the environment, your situation, your life around that. Because again, how you do anything is how you do everything. Once you get committed, you start removing any area of your life that just conflicts with the new identity, which conflicts with your future self, which conflicts with the new standard you hold yourself to. And this is in all ways. So you look at your standard as a filter. And if you set a really high standard, again, really high standards or really high goals, 10x goals are really good filtering systems because not much can pass through that filter. The 80% doesn't pass through that filter. And so once you get committed to it, and once you actually start taking the filter seriously, most of who you are and what you're doing just simply doesn't pass through the filter. Again, your identity is the filter through which you see the world. We don't see the world as it is, but as we are. So as you get more and more committed to a specific vision, a specific goal, a specific set of standards, and you get really committed to that, then you start to see the world through that filter and you start having a different lens on the things that you used to say yes to. You now say no to those things because they're no longer relevant to who you are. And you start letting go of those things. And so that's actually when you can start seeing evidence that you're reaching that point of commitment. From a psychological standpoint, you shift in motivations. You shift from being what's called push motivation to pull motivation. This is something that's happened to me recently. And it's kind of the idea that when you make a decision, the universe conspires to make it happen. At some point, you start getting so much momentum in that direction And that's when you know you've made the identity shift and the commitment shift, is because then organically you just start attracting different things. You start creating situations to weed out that 80%, the old self. And anytime you do continue in the old self behaviors, the 80%, and it doesn't have to be horrible behaviors like addictions or, crazy distractions. It could be just continuing in a job that you hate. Essentially, as you keep going into that 80%, you're essentially watering the weeds. You're not helping your cause. You're doing things that are exactly counter to who you want to be. And so the more and more you commit to your future self and commit to what you want, you make it your standard, and you start saying no to more and more things that used to be your standard, but they're no longer the standard. They're no longer what you want. As you continue to eliminate those things, you'll start to be your future self more and more and more. You'll start to be living at the level of your standard. Another way of explaining this is what psychologists call deliberate practice. In order to deliberately practice, and by the way, deliberate practice and flow are very similar things. They have similar characteristics. You have to have a clear goal in order to engage in deliberate practice or to have flow. Clear goals are a flow trigger. You can't have flow if you don't know where you're going. Specific goal, clear goal. Also, both deliberate practice, which is essentially the systemized way of developing skill and any ability. It could be skill talking to people, it could be skill writing, it could be skills playing football. You have to have clear, specific, measurable goals. You have to also get immediate feedback. Immediate feedback meaning like you can observe your behavior, you can watch it, you're getting coaching, you can like watch your tape if you're playing football. You're getting feedback from the outside world, and then you're studying that feedback and you're making improvements or adjustments. This goes back to pathways thinking, that you're actually using feedback, using the process to improve your system, improve your path. You're constantly tweaking. Naval Ravikant said that you don't become an outlier with 10,000 hours, it's 10,000 iterations. So through clear goals and then through constant feedback loops, you're constantly tweaking, iterating, clarifying. Not only clarifying your process, but even adjusting and tweaking your goal. By tweaking your goal even by 1% over a long enough period of time, the whole change is exponential. You change your whole life. You got clear goals, you've got immediate feedback. The third aspect of deliberate practice / flow is that you're practicing and trying and learning just outside your skill level, like just above. And you could also try things quite a bit above your skill level, but that'll lead to quite a bit of failure. But you should always be operating above your skill level, outside your comfort zone. That's what makes it deliberate practice. If you're just doing the same thing on autopilot and then you're not getting feedback and not adjusting, then it's not deliberate practice. Therefore, you're not in flow. Those are just flow triggers. Those are conditions that must be in place for flow to even operate in the first place. The key point here is that it is your identity. Your identity is the thing which you're most committed to. And in order for something to become your identity, it has to become a standard by which you're working towards. You're starting to say no to everything below that standard. And the more and more you actually commit to that standard and you stop wavering when things get tough or when things get scary or when you start to get confused. And once you make a true decision, the universe will conspire to make it happen. Necessity is the mother of invention. Once you actually make it your standard and you start being the buyer, you'll start respecting yourself more and others will start respecting and valuing you. But if you're the seller where you don't have clear standards and you just keep waffling and wavering and you're not really sure who you are, people won't trust you. People won't respect you. That is why you don't attract what you want, you attract who you are. And the only way to get what you want is to make it your standard, to make it a commitment, because your identity is what you're most committed to. And all your results are based on what you're most committed to. That's the key of it all. So my question for you is, what are you most committed to? You can just start by looking at your life. Whatever you have in your life right now is what you're most committed to. The question is, when are you going to make what you really want into your standard? And then start failing forward as your future self and start eliminating everything. Start looking at the world through the lens, through the filtration system of your new standard, and start saying no. And you can start saying no to little things and then certainly bigger things. And you might need to remodify, readjust some of your relationships based on new and clear standards. And if it's a transformational relationship that will continue on, then those people will transform through that relationship. They'll continue to adjust and support your new standards, figure out ways to continue forward. Or if it's a transactional relationship, the people will not want you to live according to your standards. They'll want you to be the seller, meaning you're going against your standards, going against yourself, or not having clear standards. And those are not people that you want to be around. You want to be around people who support your continually upgrading standards and transforming with you. That's what a transformational relationship is all about. That is how you transform your life. What other people think about you is none of your business. At a certain level, you need to get to a place in your mindset and your identity where you can trust yourself, where you can own what you want, and you can hear people, you can get feedback, you can get advice, but at some point or another, you're the final say.
And you do have to walk away from even what your friends, family think, what your friends on social media think, and even what your mentors or even your teachers say. At some point or another, you've got to be the one to decide what you want, and you've got to go for it with everything you've got. And you've got to get to the place where you're like, it doesn't really matter what other people say. This is what I'm going for. I'm going to own this. I'm going to do this. According to the self-determination theory, which is one of the amazing theories in motivation, we all need to get to a place of pure intrinsic motivation, pure autonomy, pure competence, pure freedom. And that level of freedom, that level of motivation means that you've blocked out all external reference points, external noise. You're just purely autonomous in what you're doing. You decide what you want. You decide the level you're going to go to. Yes, you can use resources. You can get teachers, things like that. You can have aids and you can even have competition to some degree, but you're the one who's purely decided what you're going to do. You're doing it for the sake of the thing. You love it. You've got your motives, you've got your reasons, and it's purely self-decided. There's actually a really great quote from Naval Ravikant. One of the things he says, happiness is a purely internal game. You can't have any external validation. There is no external progress. At the end of the day, as human beings, all progress is internal. It's a one-player game. And if you're still playing on the outside, if you're still competing with other people, if you're still trying to get other people's approval, then you're actually playing a multiplayer game, and you're not actually making any progress as a human being. At some point or another, you realize happiness, success, progress is all an inside job. It's an inside game. That's why the self-determination theory is so powerful, is because at some place, you get to a point where it's just pure intrinsic motivation, pure autonomy. You choose what you want, and then you decide the price you're willing to pay. So that's one of the first levels, is what other people think about you is none of your business. The next level is ultimately deciding what you want and then not worrying about the price that's willing to be paid. You've got to pay the price. That's one of the things that Stephen R. Covey said. He said, you've got to decide what you want, and then you've got to be willing to pay whatever price is required. And there is a price. There's always a price. You've got to give up what you've got for what you want. Now, it doesn't mean you have to give up everything. It's not like you've got to go and be a monk, but you've got to be willing to pay the price. If you want to get in elite physical shape, there's a price to be paid. If you want to become a millionaire, there's a price to be paid. If you want to become a professional author, there's a price to be paid. If you want to reach a certain level of spiritual development, there's a price to be paid. Tim Grover, he's the author of Relentless. He was the coach of Kobe Bryant, of Michael Jordan. He was the health trainer of those guys. He said that once you are so committed to the outcome, then the hard work becomes irrelevant. It doesn't really matter anymore. You become really committed to whatever process is required and whatever change is required. And so that's another level you need to get to, is that you're so committed to what you want that you're willing to pay whatever price is required. Whatever price that may be, that's probably going to require you to let go of a lot of the things you're holding on to, maybe some bad habits, some bad belief patterns, your fixed mindset. Whatever it is you want, it's up at this level. You've got to give up what you're holding on to that's holding you back. You've got to give up maybe some behaviors, some attitudes, some addictions, some distractions. So the question is, what do you want? And what is the price that would need to be paid? Do you know what that price is? Do you know what it's going to require of you to become that? There's a great quote from Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn said that you should have the goal to become a millionaire, not for the $1 million, but for what it would require of you to become in order to be a millionaire. There's this power of becoming that is why you set the goals in the first place. This is, again, why it's an inside job. What is the target you're seeking, and what is it going to require of you to become to have that? Ultimately, that's the end game for everything, is what you become as a result of what you're pursuing. You pursue a goal because it allows you to become something more. And so that then invites you to think, well, what goals are most powerful and what goals are most important, because what's the end game of that? The end game is whatever you become as a result. A lot of people, they chase goals and outcomes, and the end product, which is who they become, isn't what they wanted. They're still looking for something else. And so what are you going to become by chasing this? And also, what are you going to become by paying the price? By paying the price, you will transform as a person. Let me give just a few simple examples. I remember when I decided I wanted to become a professional writer, I was nowhere near that in my skill or even my mindset. But I knew that there was a price. There was a price that had to be paid. I had to learn how to build an audience. I had to learn how to write. And so by going through the process, by paying the price, it transformed me as a person. The same is true of any endeavor. In psychology, they call it deliberate practice. When you're paying the price, which is actually learning, practicing, trying, letting go of the fixed mindset, really seeing your future self, getting help, transforming your priorities, your views of the world, and ultimately becoming who you want to be, that price will transform you. It's a beautiful price. The process is beautiful. You do want to fall in love with the process, and that's step number 3, is that you become flexible in your process. You own so much on an intrinsic motivation level that you're actually doing the thing for its sake, but also because you're so committed to what it is and what it represents. You're committed fiercely to the outcome. And as the saying goes from William Hutchinson Murray, the moment one commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of events come from the decision. Once you become fully committed to the decision, then the world becomes your aid. Then you become fiercely committed. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. All of a sudden, resources come. You start to see things you didn't see before. Once you get super committed to something, then you train your brain to see it. It's called selective attention. You train your brain to see what you're looking for. What you focus on expands. So committing fully allows you to see the world from the perspective of your commitment. And that allows you to weed everything else out. Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach, actually says that 10x thinking is easier than 2x. It's easier to have a 10x vision of your future self than a 2x vision, 2 times bigger. Because with 2 times bigger, you don't necessarily need to change up everything you're doing. You just probably need to work harder. And working harder isn't the best way. When you 10x your vision, literally think about any metric in your life. It could be your income, it could be your time off of work, it could be your revenue, it could be your investments, whatever it is. Take whatever goal you have and 10x it. In order to actually do that, you would need to fundamentally change your process and probably change your identity. But what Dan talks about is that if you really commit to going 10x, then you have to shape a 10x filter. Your worldview becomes 10x, and you process everything through that 10x filter. Will this help me go 10x or will it not? It's very much like the English rowing team. Once they had the goal of going gold, and once they committed to that, they asked themselves the question, will this make the boat go faster? That became their filter for everything they did. They went out to a meal, they were offered dessert. Their question, will it make the boat go faster? If the answer is no, then bang, you don't do it. Go out to a party, will it make the boat go faster? Nope, we're going to bed early. You need to have a filtering process for everything you do. That's part of the price you pay. And you get to a point where you love that process. It becomes an end in and of itself, even though it is a means to the end that you ultimately want. And so part of this, a beautiful thing, is that you let go of the need for outcomes in the short term. Everything you do, you just do it for the love of it. You do it for the pureness of it. You just do what you fully feel is right. Pure autonomy, no worry about what other people think. You just do it for the genuineness of it. And then you let go of the need for outcomes in the short term because you're committed to the outcome in the long term. You let go. That, in other words, you become insanely in flow with your process, insanely genuine with your process, and you've let go of the need for outcomes in the moment. Because you're committed to the outcome in the long term, you've let go. As it's been said before, you become so committed to the outcome that you become flexible in the process. And there's a lot of research on this, a lot of research on hope as an example. And people who are high hope, they're so flexible in their process. They're willing to develop many workable paths to their goal. Whereas people who are low hope, they just try the same thing over and over again. And if it doesn't work, they give up. And then they justify their reasons for not succeeding. You want to just be in so much flow, so much joy, the process of learning and letting go of temporary outcomes along the way, that you're willing to find whatever works best. You're willing to just be comfortable doing what you feel is right. And then ultimately, through the deliberate practice process, you can study your work, you can study your process. You're a true student of yourself, and you're also a true student of what you're doing. And you've fallen in love with the process. You've fallen in love with the process, yet you're committed to what you ultimately want. And once you're at that level, then you have complete freedom in what you do. You have complete freedom to try, to fail, to experiment, and you can just let it go. Which then takes me to stage 4, which is having short-term extreme sprint experiments. When you're at the high performance level, it's less about marathoning, even though the whole thing is a marathon, wherever it is you're trying to go, your future self. But in the short term, you're doing sprints and recovery, sprint recovery, a lot of high intensity deep work, and then you recover yourself. So as an example, you could give yourself a short-term 1 to 3 month experiment. Let's just say you want to, be a painter or a photographer. You give yourself an insane output goal. Maybe if you're a photographer, if you're used to maybe making 100 cool pictures a month, you shoot for like 500 pictures in a single month. You just, you make it an insane goal. You go for extreme volume, extreme output. And then after that, you then can reassess. Once you've gone through this extreme output and you've really maximized output and creativity over consumption. And that's one of the big things you'll know. If you're serious, if you're committed, you're going to scale back the consumption, and you're going to certainly scale up the quality of your consumption. The quality of your consumption, whatever you consume, is going to become higher and higher grade, and you're going to be able to block out more and more the distractions. Scrolling through Facebook, scrolling through social media, that stuff is so non-valuable to your future self that you'll stop being able to justify that. and you'll become more of an output rather than an input machine. Your inputs will be higher quality. They'll be more purposeful. Any input that comes in will be for the purpose of nutrition, not just for entertainment. So think about it. When you eat something, and really the purpose of input anyways is for nutritional value. The reason we need to eat is to nourish ourselves and hopefully to strengthen ourselves. But because we live in such a consumer society, we input things for the sake of entertainment or for numbing ourselves, and ultimately it ends up being bad for our output. The purpose of input is to improve our output. And so if you're, as the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out, but anything you eat should be for the purpose of nutrition, and you can obviously have entertainment. It's fine to rest, recover, have entertainment, but you want to think, what is the ultimate purpose of input? Inputting information is to upgrade your brain, upgrade your thinking, upgrade your process so that you can make better decisions, so that you can see the world better. But if you're just inputting garbage food, garbage media, then you're actually making your ultimate system worse off. You're making your software system, you're making your body worse off so that your output becomes garbage. So the purpose of input is to improve your output. And your output is your thinking, it's your performance, it's your mindset, it's your words, it's how you live your life. How you live your life on the outside is based on what you're letting in on the inside. As Zig Ziglar said, your input determines your outlook determines your output. Your output is your performance. And so what is the quality of input coming in? You can know you're serious when you become output focused, when you start to organize your life for creativity, for output, for whatever work you're doing. If you're a business person, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a creative, you're doing more and more output. You're throwing more and more work out there and you're throwing it into the world, and you're training yourself to get better and better at output, better and better at performance, better and better at what you're doing. And the more output you do, the more you'll improve your process, the more feedback you'll get, the quicker you can iterate, the faster you can learn. And this is part of becoming courageous. The more committed you are, the more courageous you'll become. And creativity at its purest level, in pure intrinsic motivation, is a courageous act. It takes courage to fully trust yourself, to fully go for what you want, to fully go for what you believe. It takes extreme courage. It takes less courage to just compare yourself to others or to try to do what you think other people want you to do. That's a really low level. That's actually what Stephen Covey would call being dependent. If you're trying to do what other people want you to do, if you're still seeking social approval, if you're creating things in hopes that people will love it. Obviously you want people to love it, but really you want to get to the point where you're just creating it because that's what you believe you should create. Whether it be the business, whether it be your performance at work, you're doing what you believe you should, and you're doing it the way you believe you should at the highest level, and it becomes less and less about how it's appreciated by other people. It's more about you're doing it because at the fullest level, you're doing what you believe you should. At the level you should. You set your own target. You become your own reference point. Remember, it's a one-player game, as Naval Ravikant said. Happiness, success, those things are purely internal. There is no external validation. There is no external progress. It is just an inside game. The outside is just a reflection of what's going on inside. So those are some of the keys to let you know if you're becoming hyper committed. There's one other level, and that's very connected to all the others, and that's that you become extreme approach focused. Approach focus means that you're not avoiding what you don't want. You're not overly trying to stop yourself from what you don't want. You're just approaching your target. You've clarified your future self. You've clarified your target, and you're just fully approaching it. You're no longer worried about what people think. You can then ask people for advice. You can ask for support. You can ask because you're not worried about the opinions of other people. It's like a student who really wants to know in a class. They're not afraid of asking the dumb question. They're just fully approaching. They just want knowledge. They just want skills. They just want to get there. They're not worried about what their other classmates think. They don't care what their teacher thinks. They just want to know the truth. They want to know the answer. And so when you become super approach motivated, then you're approaching your future self. You're willing to pay the price. You're outputting rather than inputting. A lot of people just input for the sake of distraction. They even gain knowledge and even read great books for the sake of avoiding the work that they should be doing. Stephen Pressfield calls this resistance in his book, The War of Art, and also his book, Turning Pro. He talks about how amateurs, they feed into resistance. Resistance means you're distracting yourself from the work you should ultimately be doing. You're inputting rather than outputting. You're doing anything you can but eating the frog. And so you know that you're a pro and you know you're committed, you know you're serious when you start putting the important before the urgent. As they say in the productivity world, it's eating the frog. You put the worst first. You wake up and you start outputting. You then even train your mindset and your subconscious for more output, for higher quality output. The inventor Thomas Edison said, never go to bed without a request to your subconscious. Never go to bed without thinking about the problem you're trying to solve. Even Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, said when he goes to bed, he thinks about the problem he's trying to solve. And then he lets his brain work on it while he's asleep. Your subconscious always works while you're asleep, and it solves so many problems when it's not encumbered by your daily thought process. When you're asleep, bang, learning, memory, all those things 10x. And so if you think about your problems that you're trying to solve, if you think about your future self, if you think about your goals you're trying to accomplish, you visualize it right before bed, and then you wake up, and rather than inputting, you go straight to output. You go to your journal, you dump your thoughts. You just write for 5 to 15 minutes about your goal, about the problem you're trying to solve. You will see so many pearls of insight. You will see so many pearls of wisdom within your subconscious that you're just dumping out because you're outputting. Josh Waitzkin, the author of The Art of Learning, talks a lot about this in his interviews with Tim Ferriss, about outputting first thing in the morning and getting subconscious breakthroughs. He calls it crystallized intelligence. This is something you can get very good at. And then you can get to the point where at the end of the day, your brain just starts sparking off insights, and then you put them in your journal, you think about it, you wake up, and then you have so much creativity, so much output. And so you want to put the important before the urgent. You want to output before you start inputting. You want to eat your frog and put the important, putting your future self, putting your commitment before the busyness of the day. Schedule your appointments for the afternoon. Keep your phone on airplane mode until after you've outputted for at least 60 to 90 or 120 minutes. Eat the frog, put first things first. You'll know you're committed to your future self when it no longer requires so much resistance to just get up and start outputting. You're just outputting, you're creating, you're moving forward, you're getting feedback, and you're no longer worried about what people think. And then you have complete integrity. At the end of your day, you feel great because you've done your work first. You've faced resistance, you've done the job, you've moved forward, and you're increasingly becoming self-determined. Self-determination theory, that's where I started in the beginning. You're playing an inside game. You're committing to your own level of success. You're no longer comparing yourself to other people. You're no longer seeking external validation. You're playing your own game. It is a single player game. You're playing a single player game right now. Your input shapes your outlook, but also your inside game shapes what's going on outside of you. And the more confident you can get in your own self, and the more happiness you create as an inside game, that you're not seeking it from external levels. You're happy because you're living your life the way you believe you want to. You've defined success for yourself. You've defined the game for yourself. You are actually living it out yourself. You no longer worry about what people think. You're just owning it. You're paying your own price. You're going through your own transformation. That is the game. My name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Right here you can get the next video to the Future Self series. Please like this video, subscribe. Down below you can get a link as well that will take you to my Peak State Checklist. Peak State Checklist has been downloaded over 800,000 times. Click the link, you can get that. It'll show you how to get into a peak state first thing in the morning. Have an absolutely amazing day. See ya.